Hi, I'm Judi Friedman with PACE, People's Action for Clean Energy. We're an all-volunteer Connecticut nonprofit public health organization. We're deeply devoted to clean energy, renewable energy, energy conservation, energy efficiency. And tonight I just want to tell everyone I'm really excited about the guest we have. His name is Stephen Strong, and he has been all over the world doing great things with solar energy and clean energy. So welcome, Steve. We're so glad to have you. Thanks for coming down from Harvard, Massachusetts, and from all your wonderful projects.
Thank you, Judy. It's nice to be with you.
Steve, can you tell us, you have done major design on the White House, the natatorium for the Olympics, I believe. You worked on that. You've worked on in Geneva. Did you do a project in Geneva? Well,
the U.S. mission to the United Nations.
The U.S. mission to the United. And what did you do for the U.S. mission for the United Nations?
We gave it a solar facelift, basically covering every square meter of sunlit surface with solar.
Wow.
Different configurations.
All for solar electric.
Yes.
Yes, in Geneva. And why were you the one that was chosen to do that, your firm?
You'd have to ask the State Department that.
Yeah. So the State Department decides that, and they chose Solar Design to do that work, and you? And have you worked in Saudi Arabia also?
We powered the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, which is a whole new campus from the ground up to be a graduate-level research institute completely dedicated to future, what the King calls post-petroleum sciences. And of course, solar is a big part of that.
It's a beautiful thing. Saudi Arabia, the oil kingdom, is turning to solar energy and renewable energy big time. Is that true?
Yes, indeed.
That's wonderful.
They understand that the oil reserves are finite, and they're planning for their future.
Aha. We need to understand more that solar resources are finite here also and do more planning for our future. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, the solar resources are actually not finite. The solar resources are infinite. It's the fossil fuel reserves that are certainly finite. And the inevitable transition to renewable energy has got to get started in earnest because it's going to take a while to get there.
Well, what made you get so involved with solar energy? What was your background?
Well, my first opportunity in terms of employment coming out of engineering school was to land a job on the Alaskan Pipeline project.
And where did you go to engineering school?
I went to Northeastern University, but I didn't learn about solar there because when I went to school there was no curriculum about renewable energy, but the basic engineering curriculum was a good foundation. And I was just fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time and landed a job on the Alaskan Pipeline, which
Wow.
for a young engineer was a to-die-for assignment.
Wow.
It was at the time the largest private construction project ever undertaken.
Ever in the world?
Yes.
Wow.
But it was an interesting time there. Well, I got to see the inner workings of how the energy giants worked and what their priorities were.
Which are what?
Well, extracting the maximum amount of resources from the Earth's crust for the highest profit. When the oil price was $3.50 a barrel, the pipeline penciled out and they were moving forward with it. And while they were getting ready to get into high gear, there was a minor dust-up in the Middle East, as you may remember. And within hours, we had a world oil embargo, and within hours after that, we had gasoline lines around the block in every major western city. And the oil price went from $3.50 a barrel to $12.50 a barrel and stayed there.
Well, had us around the neck.
Yes, and that extra $9 was pure profit. So they threw money at us to get that pipeline on as fast as possible. and that came to cutting corners. A lot of the weld x-rays were falsified to hasten the process along because inspections took too long a time. And,
so they kind of scotch taped the pipeline and there could be leaks or whatever.
Well, let's just say they weren't as thorough as they might have been because there was a lot of money to be made, and every day that they didn't have it running was a day they didn't make money. So during that my tenure on the pipeline, there was what would have been a obscure scientific colloquium, the first terrestrial conference on photovoltaic energy. And it happened very close to the oil embargo. And I literally fell in love with this technology. You think about it, a slice of silicon, which is made from beach sand, about as thick as your fingernail.
Okay, let's go slowly now. Silicon is made from beach sand, so it's an ordinary, easy to get material, and that's the basis of a solar cell.
That's correct. It's basically quartzite, the second most abundant element on the Earth, effectively beach sand. Now, of course, it's got to be refined, but the refining process is quite similar in concept to making glass. Glass is also made from sand. So you have a semiconductor device about the thickness of your fingernail that is made from ordinary sand. We're not going to run out of that anytime soon. It will continue to produce electricity so long as it's exposed to sunlight, silently, with no waste or byproducts, no consumption
smell,
of materials,
no
pollution,
noise,
no depletion of resources, inert and silent, virtually indefinitely, with virtually no maintenance.
So we have energy from sand, basically, that is without pollution.
Yeah, so what's not to like about that?
Rather than oil.
Yes, the carbon into the atmosphere is building up, and we aren't at all paying attention the level we need to. We will run out of fossil fuels, but probably before that, we will run out of the ability of the atmosphere to absorb carbon. And probably before that, the remaining fossil fuels will get to be so expensive that we will stop burning this stuff because there's a lot of higher uses for it than simply just burning it up.
So you fell in love with this technology, and then what happened next? You left your pipeline?
I resigned a to-die-for job. They were literally throwing money at us to get that pipeline online and in operation.
Were you worried about spills, oil spills, because of the lax procedures? Did that bother you?
All of it bothered me. Going to the end of the earth to extract the last drop of fossil fuel just didn't turn out to be the best use, from my perspective, the best use of my budding engineering talents. The idea of producing infinite energy from the sun, which is inexhaustible and non-polluting and doesn't require going to the end of the earth and ravaging the planet. I mean, it just made sense to me as a young engineer, and it was actually hard to rationalize. It was just, it was almost an epiphany. It's like
the love affair. It's like love.
I use that analogy. My wife doesn't really like that.
Well, you love her too, but in a different way. And incidentally, you have a wonderful wife.
I'm blessed.
She's a real sun person. Well, that's great. And so then what happened? You had this epiphany, and then what did you do with that?
Well, I came back to Boston with a little bit of money and a lot of enthusiasm, and not knowing any better.
This was about when? In the 70s?
In 1974. Not knowing any better, started Solar Design Associates to...
So you're with Solar Design Associates in Harvard, Massachusetts, and you're the president of the company. And you do, what does Solar Design do?
We design energy autonomous buildings and
okay,
engineer
energy autonomous buildings.
They're self-reliant.
Self-reliant.
Or today's terminology is net zero energy or zero net energy buildings, or we call them energy plus buildings, because we're actually now designing buildings that produce more energy than they need
That's so beautiful. Okay, you have not a house that doesn't consume it. You have a house that not only uses it, but produces more than it needs. That's beautiful.
We're routinely designing houses now that create all the energy they need and also satisfy the owner's transportation needs.
Wonderful.
With electric vehicle recharge ports.
When you came here, you were driving a Prius, but that Prius was not like any one I've ever seen before. Can you tell us what you did to your Prius?
The Prius has been converted to be all electric because we got really impatient waiting for the factories to finally decide that it was a good idea.
So you went ahead of Toyota and did it your own.
Yes, we've also converted some of our Honda Insights to plug-in electric with additional battery capacity. It's wonderful to run on sunlight. You don't know how nice it feels.
Well, I think that's what's exciting. Electric cars, one thing, but most electric cars use conventional energy. You have an electric car that's using solar energy. And
Yes.
to me, that's what I call the cat's meow.
It's amazingly satisfying. The car's silent. Obviously, it's non-polluting. And the nice part is that you have essentially zero maintenance.
Ah, wow.
You don't have to change the oil. You don't have to tune it up. You don't have any antifreeze. You don't have any exhaust systems or mufflers or catalytic converters to replace.
You never have to drive into a gas station and get out of your car and all this. You just plug it in, right?
Plug it in at night, and it's ready to go in the morning.
It's wonderful, wonderful. With solar, photovoltaic, clean electric energy. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
but you've also worked in other forms of energy. You've worked with wind, is that correct?
We did the first, one of the first utility scale wind turbines on the New England coast, which is at the western mouth of the Cape Cod Canal to power the Massachusetts Maritime Academy.
Wow.
It towers over the campus. You can see it from the Bourne Bridge. And it's a very good wind source there because it's right at the head of Buzzards Bay.
Wonderful.
And we've done smaller wind installations for residences and smaller commercial buildings, but wind is hard to site. The resource is very microclimatic specific, and also there's a lot of resistance from abutters in terms of siting wind turbines, so it's tough. When the resource exists and the setting is appropriate, wind can be a good choice, but it's not at all as ubiquitous or widespread as solar. Solar is much more universally distributed and therefore is much more usable for pretty much everybody.
I think what some people don't understand is there are various kinds of solar energy. There's photovoltaic, solar electricity, and then also solar thermal. Can you tell us a little about that?
Solar thermal can be used for domestic hot water heating, which is the most widespread application, and also for space heating. Space heating is a little bit more of a challenge because you need more surface area, and it's more of a challenge to retrofit to an existing building.
But Steve, this is Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont. This isn't Arizona. Does solar really work?
We're routinely designing energy autonomous homes in northern New England that make more energy than they need and, as I mentioned before, have a surplus to power the owner's transportation requirements.
Can you tell us about the house in New Hampshire that you worked on?
There's one in New Hampshire that has a roof covered with photovoltaics. It also has some solar thermal for water heating and an electric vehicle recharge port in the garage.
Wow.
The owner's requirements are completely satisfied and they have a surplus at the end of the year.
And I've also seen a home that you built that's very beautiful, I believe on the Maine coast in Kennebunk.
Yes.
And it's solar hot water and solar electricity, and it's a beautiful house. And the owner, I think, monitors the energy on a 24-hour basis. Is that true?
Indeed, yeah. Bill, the owners are Bill and Debbie Lord. very much enamored with solar living. Debbie calls the house a gift. And Bill is always monitoring how many BTUs he's got.
Is there a website that people can go online and look at what they're doing?
Bill is, yes, has a background in television and has always been excited about telling the story. And so they have a website which is very simply solarhouse.com.
Okay, www.solarhouse.com, and you can go on and learn about this house and what the output is. And this is on the coast in Maine, a cloudy, not what you would think your southwestern
Not your ideal climate for solar,
No.
It's relatively modest amounts of solar resources in a very challenging winter climate.
And then you say you also have worked on micro hydro. Is that right?
Yes, micro hydro is attractive, but it's much like wind. It's extremely site specific.
Right.
Sunlight is pretty well distributed,
But in Connecticut, we have many, many, many little streams and small rivers that are underutilized that we could be utilizing for power.
Yes, that's true. And if there's an existing dam that has been out of service, you might be able to repurpose it. We like to see run of the river where we are not damming any of the water courses. It's extremely difficult to get a permit to dam an existing water course these days, and I think that it should stay that way. But it's relatively straightforward for residents or a small business with a relatively modest amount of energy requirement to do a run of the river, where you basically just take water from upstream, bring it down through a pipe, which can be even hidden in the stream bed, and run it through a small hydro turbine and generate your electricity and put the water right back into the stream.
Wow, that's wonderful.
And
Good for you.
Very little impact there with that approach.
Steve, if you were designing a house that was it was net zero or even produce more energy than it uses, what would that house be like? What different features would that house have?
Well, we typically take the box. A lot of houses are basically a rectangle with typically 2 rooms deep. And you'd take it and you'd spread out the rooms so that you have a very wide but very shallow house, 1 room deep house with circulation. Every room would have south glass. Every room would have sun controlling geometry so that the sun is kept out during the late spring, summer, and early fall so it doesn't overheat. You'd have super insulation. You'd have a very tight thermal envelope with low amounts of air migration or drafts. You'd have an air-to-air heat exchanger for carefully controlled fresh air ventilation. You'd have radiant heat distribution.
I love
warm
that.
floors.
Radiant heat, warm in the winter, warm on your feet. That is the most wonderful source of energy.
It is, and whenever you get to experience it, everyone feels the same way you do. You don't want anything else.
And heat rises, so to have heat coming from the floor makes all the sense in the world.
It does, and in addition to that, it's silent.
Yeah.
And there's no dust blowing around from warm
Radiators.
air, and it's uniform, and yes, it's absolutely delightful.
We have one room with that in, and our dog loves it. Babies crawling on the floor.
Yes.
They love it. It's wonderful. What else would you have in a house that was the ideal house? What else?
Well, of course, solar electricity.
Uh-huh.
And if it were built in a warmer climate, you might have a geothermal heat pump to provide dehumidification and mechanical air conditioning if that were needed. In New England, we typically don't include air conditioning unless the clients have an insistence upon it, because you can stay quite comfortable with proper cross ventilation and sunshades to keep the direct sun out. Internal thermal mass, let the house cool at night.
And trees? What about trees?
Well, it's nice to have trees on the east, north, and west.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want any on the south because you want to capture as much passive solar gain as you can, letting the sun into the house to warm it and to light it.
And how about the back side, the north side?
Well, that can be either heavily insulated or insulated and earth bermed. Earth berming is sort of neat. It's conceptually attractive. It does require more expenses in terms of the structure and the waterproofing. And there are better ways to achieve the same thermal results with just high levels of insulation, such as the Passive House standard, which you'll be talking about later in your program.
But I think, Steve, what your big point is, and I just want to be sure that people understand that the most important thing is weatherization.
Right. I like to say insulate before you insulate.
Do what? Oh, I see that. Insulate before you insolate.
Yes. Solar insulation is important, but thermal insulation is more important. It's easier to save a unit of energy than to produce one, regardless of how you produce it. And it's still surprising to me, Judy, how less excited people are about just making their houses or buildings tighter. They seem to go for the pizzazz, and they like solar panels and solar modules, but really, I'm one of the most zealous solar advocates you're ever going to want to meet, but I tell people right off, solar's the last thing I want you to do. And that gets their attention. And then you say, well, what? Why? Well, because you need to reduce your loads first, tighten up the building, get energy efficient appliances and end-use equipment.
Very, very important. Tighten your building, get energy efficient appliances, use energy efficient lighting,
Yes.
LED lighting, and daylighting. Very important.
One of the problems, I think, with all of this is that the statistics show that the average American moves or relocates every 5 to 7 years. So people are just not focused on a longer term investment.
Sounds like our politicians, they're kind of thinking 2 years ahead in the next election instead of looking at the welfare of the people long term.
Yes, there's a real lack of long-term vision in every quarter these days.
Steve, I think you feel very strongly. One of the things that PACE feels so strongly about is we're a health organization, and we're very concerned about energy and pollution, because pollution, Connecticut is the state in the country with the highest rates of breast cancer, for instance.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the energy is the pollution that comes from energy, and so we are adamantly opposed to nuclear energy. And I think people are beginning to wake up about nuclear energy, and I think Fukushima has made them sit up and take notice. Can you talk a little about what's going on now in Japan and Fukushima? And people can say, oh, well, that's Japan. Connecticut doesn't need to worry about that, but we do, because the wind blows and we do eat fish, and the fish are connective, something that connects us all, as do the winds. So can you talk a little about Fukushima and where that's at right now, which we're not hearing?
Yeah, the press has moved on to which Hollywood starlet is going to have a tummy tuck surgery or something. It's very sad that the real news is not being reported. And you're right, Fukushima is unless you dig deep and want to find the information.
What's the problem with Fukushima? It's far away. What do I have to worry about it for?
Well, there are lots of problems, Judy. One is that the utility that's been, quote unquote, managing it or responsible for it has been lying to the public and the Japanese government since day one. And that there are thousands and thousands of gallons of highly radioactive water being discharged into the ocean every day. Every day,
thousands of gallons of radioactively contaminated water into the ocean. And yes. The ocean currents move.
The ocean currents take it away,
and the fish.
It doesn't dissipate, it doesn't go away. It has a half-life of hundreds of thousands of years with the most radioactive isotopes. And it gets into the food chain, and that's inevitable. And like you said, we're all tied together by the wind and the ocean currents, and we have to eat. So
And I think that's one reason why you and I and many people involved in PACE and these other organizations are so incredibly fixated on clean energy, because it's a health issue, and nuclear power is one of the most serious health issues of our time. It affects unborn generations. And there's also a problem with fuel rods in Japan, I believe. They're very worried about that.
Oh yes, the entire site is a time bomb, and it's getting to be near impossible to keep it under control, because the radiation is getting so intense that people will not be able to work there.
There's a petition going around that we hope people will sign to get the whole world experts involved and not just have Japan try to do it and not do it well, because they do not know what to do, I gather. Is that true? Is that true?
I'm afraid that's true from day one. A lot of mistakes were made. Of course, even before day one, they designed this reactor complex right on the coast in an area with severe earthquake activity, which was known. They put the emergency generators in the basement, which is essentially at or below sea level. They built a little water break, a wave break, which obviously was not sufficient. But unfortunately, the Fukushima reactors have been multiplied all around the world, and there are many in this country, including the Pilgrim Nuclear Station in Massachusetts and Vermont Yankee in Vermont.
And these are two nuclear power plants that, should they have an accident, could affect Connecticut residents, because where the wind and rain goes, that is how we're affected if something should happen.
Fortunately, the people in Vermont had the perseverance to keep protesting and keep the pressure on to close Vermont Yankee, and Entergy has decided to close it.
Yeah.
They claim it's economic reasons, and I can certainly understand that that's a big factor, because nuclear power has never been economic. It's always been subsidized by you and I and the taxpayers.
And here we have energy from grains of sand that we could be using instead, and we need to move toward those kinds of energies and to try to weatherize and do all these things that will help us not be so dependent on these terrible sources of pollution, like also fracking for natural gas and the coal mining sites, and so many problems that we could take care of with these elegant technologies.
Yes, if you want to add a patio to the back of your house and it's within 100 feet of a skunk cabbage in the wetland, you can't get a permit to do that. But in West Virginia, they can remove entire mountaintops and bury the streams and all of the flora and fauna in the valleys next to them, and that's just fine.
Well, we're very, very, very pleased that you could join us, and I just congratulate you so much on your work all over the world, and you've made such a difference for all of us in the clean energy field, and you're a guiding light, and you're a winner of our PACE Award, our Lifetime Achievement Award, you and your wonderful wife, and we can't thank you enough for coming and being part of the PACE group and speaking to us today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Judy, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. It's a great joy, and we're very happy to be here and have you here, and your wonderful work. I hope you can continue. I hope you live forever and keep shining your light on all of us and helping us to move toward clean energy and safe energy and good health. So thank you so much.
Thank you.